They want to reinforce the idea that trans kids are an out group, so it's socially harder for kids to transition. They don't care that this makes people depressed. Literally any way that they can disincentivize us. Yep. They would like for trans people to stop existing in whole or in part. It's not at all like that. It's not at all like that. So we have some news from the Biden administration, and depending on how you spin it, you could see it as good news or you could see it as bad news. Personally, I think that it's not good news. In the midst of all of this nonsense happening across the country with anti-trans healthcare bills, rights being limited, and families being threatened with child kidnapping from the state, it's getting to be a little bit insane. Why? Tell me why Biden's response, Biden's administration's response to this, is to weigh in on the trans athlete ban of all things. And yes, I live in Kansas. We literally just today had a law pass, and we're so fucked. We have a Democratic governor, but they've just proven with this sports ban that they are going to be able to override her veto. So I'm fucked in Kansas. It's not good. That aside, it's not okay to enforce genital inspections as part of the being in sports as a child thing, but that's kind of what they're doing. It's not great. And so, yeah, I guess on some level, it could be seen as appropriate to try to address that issue. Yeah, ban sports entirely. Right. What the Biden administration has done is they've proposed Title IX rules, which would give schools flexibility for, quote, fairness in competition, or for the possibility that participation could lead to injury. With regards to trans students, they're trying to propose a rule that's going to forbid schools from enacting outright bans on trans athletes from teams consistent with their gender identity, but offering flexibility for, quote, fairness and other such exceptions that are likely to apply at the highest levels of competition. So essentially, they're saying maybe if you're 8 years old and you're playing on the school fucking soccer team or something, then yeah, that you can play on that. But once you get to varsity level sports, once you're getting to junior and senior level in high school or in colleges, they're saying we are going to allow you all to on your own decide at each school, each institution, whether they're going to allow trans people to participate. And, we've talked in the past, I'll put a link up here if I remember to put a link in the cards. There was an article that we read a while back about the fact that if you look at the differences between men and women in sports, the main difference in their performance is the fact that women's sports are dramatically underfunded. Men's sports, they get better coaches, they get better training equipment, and there's just more money pumped into it. So if you were to treat them as equal or integrate them, God forbid, then you would have much more consistency of outcomes between the two groups. And obviously we would have seen this bear out at the Olympic level. Someone in the YouTube chat was talking about it would be better if they just used the rules the Olympics have. Yeah, the Olympics has had rules about the amount of testosterone you're allowed to have in your body as a trans woman participating in the sport. And lo and behold, it's been 17 goddamn years, and there is not an overwhelming amount of trans women defeating cis women, completely boxing out women's sports. Yeah, OMG, what if women are not actually overwhelmingly inferior to men? It's so sad to me how one of the fundamental things about this argument is that almost all cis women across the entire planet have been convinced that the only way that they're able to win in sports is because they have their own cute little protected category, and that the actual reason that they have a protected category is just because if they were to compete against the men, they would be able to win, and that would challenge male supremacy. They've fully bought in. They've fully have drank the Kool-Aid on this, and it's just super sad. So disappointing. The primary difference between cis women and trans women is average height, but our height is well within the ranges of female athletes. Right, just integrate the sports, and then in the cases where it matters, separate them by weight and height class if you need to. If height confers a major benefit in a sport, then sure, distribute it by make height and weight differences, but just integrate it. On Star Talk, there was actually a study showing cisgender women are much better in gymnastics than all other groups. Yeah, it's something about the proportions, perhaps, or the flexibility, perhaps, that estrogen provides to the body. I could see that for sure. I mean, another thing that I've seen is that the big difference I mean, it's not even a big difference, but generally speaking, you will see that cis men, are winning over cis women in sports that require a heavy amount of exertion in a short period of time, whereas women tend to win in cases where endurance matters. So marathons and long-term endurance kind of things, we might see some differences in those specific areas. Like women might generally not be as competitive in some ways, but they're more competitive in other ways. Like, I mean, because body differences. Additionally, if you follow a statistical analysis of what happens to a trans woman's performance, for example, a swimmer like Leah Thomas, you can see that on an individual basis, performance loss can be more drastic than the differences between the records set in either gender for the same competition. So like, yeah, for trans women taking estrogen and testosterone blockers, the difference in their performance can be rather drastic, like bigger than the difference in top winning performance in either gendered category. Has this ever affected you, Lux, or were you not a sporty kid? Excellent question. I appreciate the personal lore moment. I did not have to deal with gender segregation issues when I was a young warthog, but I did play sports. You know, this is one of those fun things where you kind of have to lie to people if you're trying to be stealth. Like, I played softball when I was younger, but I have definitely told people, I have outright lied and said like, oh yeah, I used to play baseball. Yeah, like my mom got me into baseball in the summers, and and then, which means that I wasn't able to talk about the fact that I did volleyball. A lot of this shit I did because my mom was really insisting on getting me into sports. Like I had something every day of the week. She had me in something, which like to some extent I appreciate, but also like it was so annoying at the time. So I over the course of my childhood, I did softball, volleyball, track and field. I did like karate, like martial arts. Having had exercise phases before and after transition, I can say testosterone is definitely a crutch. Trans sports has more people defending separate but equal than I've ever seen in my life. Truly disturbing how many people think separate but equal is ever going to be equal or good. I don't really understand it either. Like, I really don't understand how you can be so convinced. But I mean, I guess it's the same thing. People used to be convinced that there were major like biological differences between white people and black people that justified keeping black people separate in society. And they just as much thought like, oh, well, yeah, it's clear. It's clearly a matter of fact. Like, clearly questioning black women's womanhood is fine because look at how much they look like men, like not acknowledging that like femininity and masculinity are just different when you have different facial structures. Yeah, some people are just more equal than others. No worries. No worries. But kind of coming back to Biden taking this position, like he's managed to piss off everybody involved, I think, because of the fact that this preserves the ability for less competitive, or realistically what that means is like younger students to participate in sports. He's pissed off the conservatives with that, and then allowing that certain instances of competitive sports, meaning like sports where scholarships and stuff are going to be involved, limiting those is going to piss off a huge portion of the liberals. So it's like in the midst of all of this anti-trans rhetoric, all of this like actually losing our access to fucking healthcare, our children being threatened, like our children losing access to healthcare, coming out and doing something like this, which pisses off everybody and is still fundamentally transphobic and like still fundamentally is not following the science and evidence on these issues. I just don't get it. Like, it's so insulting. I don't understand what the point of this is, which is why it's so maddening. Like, it's why I'm so angry about it. And it's like, I just don't get why you would do this right now. It literally would have been better if you had just stayed out of it completely. I think this is a way to get women out of sports too. They don't want women playing sports. Women's rights are under attack by conservatives, not trans people. Yeah, I mean, it's a decent point. Like, what in Kansas, where the law just passed that means like you have to basically allow your child to potentially be physically inspected in order to play sports. Like, what parent is going to send their kid to sports if they're going to potentially have to have some random stranger inspect their genitals? Like, realistically, the people who are going to be primarily affected by anti-trans sports laws is going to be cisgender girls. In just the same way that the people who are primarily affected by bathroom bans are cisgender women who just have short hair or who are older and like maybe are in menopause, so they don't have as much estrogen in their body anymore. Like, those are the people who get affected. I wonder if this is only going to apply to girls' sports with the genital inspections. I mean, that's realistically who it is going to affect the most. There's not as much politically motivated reason to question a little boy on the boys team, you know, because they're weaponizing this. It's really just, it comes back to racism. It's the white woman who needs to be protected bullshit. Because also, like, this tends to get weaponized against black girls. There was at least one example last year of a young black cisgender girl having her participation in the sports called into question because white parents don't like it when black kids win. So they're like, oh, I'm accusing you of being a boy. But yeah, it could potentially destroy girls' sports, because why would you as a parent put your kid in a situation where their genitals might become the subject of conversation amongst a large group of people, like questioning whether your child is trans or not, and like insisting upon doing a physical examination? You would just be like, no, honey, you can't do sports. Like, we're not doing sports. Yeah, TERFs when a cis woman isn't pretty enough for them. I diagnose you with penis. If they inspect the girls, they should be required to check the boys too. It's not like your genitals have to be inspected as a matter of course. It's like, if someone questions you, then your genitals need to be inspected. So it's like, if you have someone who they say, I think that child is trans, then they have to be examined. Never forget, the only case of an unfair advantage for a trans person was the trans boy who was forced to play with girls when he wanted to play with boys. That kid was already on testosterone. I think he's an adult now, but like, he was on testosterone and they made him play against the girls and he won. And I'm sure that felt like shit. I could see them making young trans men take testosterone tests to make sure they don't have hormonal advantage over cis boys. They wouldn't allow them to play, though, is the thing. They would just say you can't play at all, realistically. They'd be like, well, you're trans and you can't play with the boys, but you're on testosterone, so you can't play with the girls. I think there was a place that they passed that law, and after the first inspection, enough people complained that they backed off of it. We can hope. I mean, it sucks that it has to come to, like, they literally legalize pedophilia in order to get cisgender people to care about the fact that they're attacking trans rights. You know that they're gonna go home, though. After they're gonna go and they're gonna complain and they're gonna rah, 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 rah about the genital inspections, but they don't actually care. They're still gonna be like, well, I still think that trans people shouldn't be in sports probably, but like, you can't enforce it in this way. Like, that's ultimately what they really care about. They want to reinforce the idea that trans kids are an out group, so it's socially harder for kids to transition. They don't care that this makes people depressed. Literally any way that they can disincentivize us, creating social consequences, creating social difficulties, singling us out, like pretty much anything they can do, they're happy to do. Yep, they would like for trans people to stop existing in whole or in part. In whole or in part. Interesting. Conservatives are doing everything they can to empower random bigots to legally harass anyone they dislike. Abortion provider bounties, gender-affirming care provider bounties, making it so parents can accuse students of being trans if their kid doesn't win, which you know disproportionately affects kids of color, never mind trans kids. Between this and the selective Second Amendment, they seem to want to turn their base into their enforcers. Yeah, it's not at all reminiscent of the Nazis drumming up social contagion against Jewish people and having them form militia groups. It's totally not. It's not at all. It's not at all like that. It's not at all like that. It's not. Happy April. Thank you so much to all of my Patreon supporters, and especially I want to shout out Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Danielle McDonald, Amanda B, R. Halverson, Sarah A, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Michelle Winter, Athiette, Jamie Jam, Wellington Marcus, Elizabeth Bartell, Nova, Sojo, Suzanne Maynard, Mr. Atheist, and Kevin Young.